My name is Sophia van Valkenburg, and today I will be discussing the effects of various composting methods on basil growth. To begin with a little bit about me, my name is Sophia van Valkenburg. I go to George Washington High School, and I'm currently planning to go to James Madison University to pursue a career in environmental sciences. The reason why I chose this topic for my SRP is because when I was growing up, I was always involved when my family would grow our own plants, herbs, and vegetables, and I always found a sense of success after it because I was able to use it. I've also always had a general interest in the environment and how we as humans can find more sustainable ways to increase growth and production rates without harming the environment with inorganic methods. This is helpful to our environment along with farmers to allow them to sell more of their products in a healthier manner. For some background information on basil and its purpose, it is used in many professions to assist them in their work. Basil has been used for medicinal practices, cooking, and therapeutic roles within its essential oils. It has been dated back to many tribes as a relief for cold-like symptoms, which is still used today in many home remedies. It is also a flavor additive for many different cooking cuisines, and the essential oils within the leaves are known to be used for therapeutic purposes to clarify, calm, and uplift the mind. There are many methods of growing basil that I found within my research, which included transplanting and direct sowing. Direct sowing is when you put the seed straight into the garden to begin growing, while transplanting allows the plant to grow more before it goes into the outside environment. Basil needs a specific environment to prosper, which is well-drained soil, humid conditions, tropical climates, and it is important to keep this constant throughout the process. For higher growth rates and to determine how fertile the compost is it important to look at chemical and physical properties. Throughout my studies, there are many different types of testing, but the most continuous throughout were temperature, pH, and nitrogen. Each of these tests look at a different part of the compost. Temperature determined how fast the compost is being decomposed. pH is good to measure because the acidity levels change based on which stage it is in. And lastly, nitrate needs to be measured in order to keep the carbon to nitrogen ratio in balance, which a pivotal study I read said that a 30-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio was good to ensure there is no plant toxins. But it is important to note that no one test can be perfect. To dive deeper into this topic, composting is an organic method of decomposition using kitchen waste, green materials, and many other products used in our daily lives. The purpose is to make a natural fertilizer to enhance the growth of plants and to reduce the amount of organic waste going into landfills because it causes an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. While there are a variety of ways to produce compost, the specific methods I'm going to focus on are aerobic and vermicomposting. Aerobic composting is a decomposition of organic waste, but it also requires oxygen, which speeds up the decomposition rates by changing the type of microbes, and this needs to be aerated daily. Vermicomposting is a very similar process to aerobic composting, but it uses earthworms as a catalyst for faster decomposition rates. To address the gap in my literature, my research question is, how does aerobic composting or vermicomposting change the overall growth of basil plants over a period of time? Based on the sources that I've read, my research hypothesis is if vermicomposting is added to basil plants, then the overall growth will be larger than other variations. Therefore, my null will be if compost is added to basil plants, then there will be no effect on the overall growth than without composting. Based on my research and past knowledge, my independent variable was my composting methods and my dependent was the growth. Therefore, my control is the plants without the compost. Lastly, my constants are the type of soil, water, feedstock, and the environment. The materials that I needed for my experiment was the feedstock, which consisted of grass, fruits and vegetable waste, coffee grinds, eggshells, cow manure, dried leaves, sawdust, and paper shreds. I also needed worms, soil, a soil thermometer, aquatic testing strips, basil seeds, water, and a greenhouse. Regarding my sample, the population was basil and the size was 45. To begin my methods, I first gathered my composting materials, which included the feedstock, water, worms, greenhouse, testing strips, and soil thermometer. I then created the feedstock using equal amounts of each ingredient to ensure the equality of the compost. During the 6 weeks of composting, I tested, turned, and watered the compost daily. To test the compost, I took the temperature first, then using the aquatic testing strips, I got the pH and nitrate levels. I then gathered my data and made sure it correlates to my past studies. I turned the compost and watered each with 200 milliliters. After 6 weeks, I randomized the basil seeds into 3 groups using a random number generator to assign all 90 seeds. After randomizing the seeds, I planted them with 2 per each compartment in case of failed seeds, using 15 compartments per each method. For 4 weeks, I watered them daily at the beginning stages of growth, and then I moved to every other day after 2 weeks. I also measured the growth daily using centimeters from the base of the soil to the tip of the plant to see how rapid each plant growth would be. For my final growth, I measured the plant in centimeters from root tip to the top of the plant. And lastly, I compiled my raw data in an Excel spreadsheet and conducted a statistical analysis test. For my statistical test, I used a one-way ANOVA to see the differences within my compost variations and my control. With this data, I was able to draw conclusions on the differences between the 3 groups. And at the significance level of 0.05, I failed to reject the null hypothesis with a p-value of 0.13. I decided it was best to use a bar graph to display my data because it shows a visual representation of the sums of the overall growth. This type of graph can easily be used to compare the variations of compost and see how it affected the overall growth. There is not sufficient statistical evidence at the 0.05 significant level to conclude that compost has an effect on plant growth. Shown in a study I read in 2022, they also came to the same conclusion. While there was not a large gap in the data, what is presented is still viable to the farmers and general public. My data also shows a contrasting to other existing sources and that further research needs to be done in order to prove which version of the research is most helpful to the general public. My results can help further information on this topic by demonstrating that different process of composting yields different results. Without having access to a high-quality regulated greenhouse, I would say this was my main issue when growing my plants. This correlates to the timing that I completed my study, and when the temperature lowers, it limits the basil's ability to grow. I also believe that if I were to have more variations of feedstock, it would allow for a deeper understanding of how each part affects the growth. Based on my experimental design, I would guide further researchers to test variations of methods in feedstock to reveal more ways in which farmers can ensure efficient growth of crops. Lastly, I think keeping a stable environment for basil in warm conditions with well-drained soil will allow for more accurate results. After conducting my experiment, I learned how important time management skills are. I had to set aside a period of time each day and to take care of the plants and to ensure that I was moving through the process correctly. This research process and experiment also allowed me to realize that this is something a path that I would like to pursue in my future, and I would like to further analyze ways that us as humans can find more sustainable ways for sustainable methods for future generations. Before I take any questions, I would like to thank Ms. Long for assisting me within the process, Ms. Gravitt for helping me decide my statistical analysis, and Dr. Bocock for allowing me to complete my study. Thank you, and are there any questions?
So I think I understood that. Did you have one compost bin with the worms, one without?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And do you think, and you left them in there for 6 weeks, do you think that if it was longer, you continue to do this for a longer period of time, do you think that may have changed your results? As far as letting the compost longer?
Dr. Jones is asking me if the time of how long that I left my compost in the bins would affect my results. I do think that if I left it in there longer, it would, because I know the longer that the organic waste is being decomposed, it causes more nutrients to come out within it. Mr. Hare?
So the water that you used, was it distilled? Was it from a well? Where's your water supply from?
Mr. Hare is asking about my water supply for my compost and my plants. I used tap water from the city, from my house.
Okay.
Yes, sir. misfits.
What, I didn't see the factors that you were using to gauge the level of growth of the basil plants. What was your gauge of how well it did?
Ms. Walls is asking what my gauge of growth was. My gauge of growth from the very end was from shoot to the top of the plant, which is basically from the very end where the root begins to the top of the plant, where it ends. And I just took that and I added them all together and I used that in my ANOVA.
So you measured them with a ruler or something?
Yes,
like that?
yes, yes ma'am,
Thank you.
centimeters.
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
I heard you mention coffee grounds used in the material section. How did you use those during the experiment?
He is asking about my coffee grounds within my experiment. I used coffee grounds as a filler because in past studies that I've read, I put that, a lot of them put that in the compost along with the sawdust and the paper shreds as a way to absorb some extra moisture within it.